Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and welcome to the next installment in this series, where I go through the original Ocarina of Time in different sections, and after finishing certain sections, coming back and talking about all the different changes we could see in this long theorized, rumored, and now widely reported full remake for The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Supposedly, this remake is going to have a big budget and is coming up for the 40th anniversary later this year. It's unconfirmed at this point, we shall see. We do not know the full extent of this remake, but there are a lot of possibilities. So many possibilities that I thought I could make an entire series playing through different sections of the game and making different videos on these different sections. And after the feedback from the first video, I've decided to continue. I wasn't sure, but a lot of you really enjoyed the first video, so here we are with another one. In the first one, we talked about the very beginning of the game, Kokiri Forest and Inside the Deku Tree, the first dungeon of the game. And there's a surprising amount of changes that we discussed just within the very first section of the game, the very first hour, if even that. But there is so much more. This time what we're going to be focusing on is Hyrule Field, how they might change that around. Perhaps Lon Lon Ranch will see some changes as well, the overall structure of the world, but also Castle Town and Hyrule Castle. After playing through these sections of the game, I have quite a few notes on what could be changed here, so we have a lot to get into this time. But before doing so, have you ever played Hero Wars? Well, now is as good of a time as any because Hero Wars Dominion Era is celebrating their 10th anniversary and there are some fantastic rewards for new players. Jumping in is so easy. It's free to play, you go straight to the website, there is a link in the description below by the way, and you're immediately thrown into the war, engaging in battles, seeing the story, collecting new characters within short minutes. Progression is both fast and easy, and it's really fun to see your heroes power up very quickly, take down enemies with their specials, and unlock even more upgrades as you progress, and it's so easy to equip different power-ups and level up your stats. Within minutes, you're going to be seeing some real progress here. And for the 10th anniversary, there are some really nice rewards for new players. By using my promo code AndresRestart, you will get 255,000 gold, 1,000 emeralds, 25 smaller EXP potions, and the hero Polaris. But also for the 10th anniversary, Hero Wars is introducing the new hero, Berna. So now is a great time to join in by clicking the link in the description below and using my promo code AndresRestart. So immediately after you leave the forest and you say your goodbyes to Saria, you find yourself in this opening to Hyrule Field. There are supposed to be some trees. If you travel a little bit down, you'll meet Kapora Gabora the owl. But before getting to that, if you decide to turn around and head back into the forest, you'll enter this sort of like tunnel, and the game will fade to black and open back up on this bridge in the forest. These sections are divided. There is a loading screen here. In this remake, I envision that there will not be loading screens like this. The world will be continuous, seamless. This wasn't possible when the game was initially made back on Nintendo 64, but if we're talking about a full remake here, built from the ground up, something like this I believe should be expected. Now, if they're going to do this, this will require filling in the gaps here. How do you get from the forest to the opening of Hyrule Field? They'll have to add more to the map. There'll have to be a little bit more in between these areas to show the natural progression. And also, this can impact how cutscenes work as well. So we just mentioned when you say goodbyes to Saria when you're leaving the forest, that scene ends with Link running away, but he runs away into the tunnel where things open up into Hyrule Field. So if this is changed around, the way that cutscene works will have to be adjusted a little bit. Perhaps this cutscene will end with Link running away, as it already has, but maybe they even show the cutscene a little bit longer with Link running away further off into the distance as Saria stares off wistfully, giving a little bit more opportunity to show that interesting character interaction. I actually think there's a lot of potential with adding to the cutscenes here. I'll touch more on that a little bit later on to the video. But changes in some areas will also require adjustments in others. But this ultimately can lead to more interesting cutscenes and a more interesting, interactive, believable world where everything is continuous. Now, as you progress into the Hyrule Field right before it truly opens up when you're getting past the opening section with some trees, you will meet Kapora Gabora the owl. And the owl has a lot of tutorials he explains to you. I should have maybe mentioned this in the first installment of this series, but I do think the way tutorials work will be tweaked here. Let's remind ourselves that this game came out in 1998 in the infancy of 3D gaming. It's been some decades since, so people have adjusted to the way 3D games work now. So I expect tweaks here. I'm not saying that they will do away with tutorials. Tutorials will still be a thing. Tutorials are in all kinds of games now, but there will be adjustments. Now, something I hope isn't adjusted though, is this quirky little choice they made with this first interaction with the owl. You see, at the end of his explanation, he asks you if you need to hear it again, and they change the order of yes and no. Every other time you interact with the owl, yes and no are flipped to the proper way, but if you're just pressing A quickly through without actually reading through and paying attention, you will find yourself listening to the tutorial again and again until you take a moment to actually read and respond accordingly. I find the interaction clever. Maybe some people argue it's annoying and they should do away with it, but I think it's important to think about the quirks of the original Ocarina of Time and make sure to keep a lot of them. I think any kind of remake should be focused on maintaining the spirit of the original, even if it's going to be its own new experience. There's a lot of essence they want to try and maintain, so random little quirks like this I think should be strongly considered in sticking around for the remake. But as we venture off into Hyrule Field and we progress towards Hyrule Castle, there is something I noticed that I think probably should change. And that's the overall structure of Hyrule Field itself. If we're talking about looking at this game with modern visuals and it being a continuous world where they will be filling in some of the gaps already so we can have these seamless connections, perhaps they should also consider expanding the scale a bit here. Because if we're looking at things with more realistic visuals here, or better visuals, then the scale of the world might not really feel quite right. They may have to rethink exactly how they put things together here. Hyrule Field in Ocarina of Time is just a small fraction in size compared to all other future Zelda games. Now, I'm not expecting them to greatly expand Hyrule Field here, but I do think some expansion will make sense in terms of depicting the world with a more believable scale with these modern visuals. And I also think this might extend to changing around the positioning of the regions as well. Because something that's kind of funny about the way things are put together in Ocarina of Time, 3 of the major areas in the game, basically half of the major areas in the game, are all right next to each other. Zora's Domain, Death Mountain, and Hyrule Castle are all basically in one corner of the map, and then the other 3 regions of the world, like Hylia, the Gerudo Desert, and the Forest, are spread out on the other side. I think they should space things out just a little bit more so it feels a bit more natural and it makes a bit more sense, especially if they're scaling things up here. I think there could be more changes to Hyrule Field as well, but I'll get into that a little bit later on. As we head into Castle Town, heading towards Hyrule Castle, something I noticed immediately once the drawbridge came down is just seeing the buildings off into the distance. They're depicted with these flat little pixeled images and it doesn't look good at all. Something like that obviously is going to be changed. But upon stepping into Castle Town, something else I noticed that needs to change is the way Castle Town is depicted. In the different areas in Castle Town as you explore, you're going to see the area from fixed camera angles in the original, and you have zero control over the camera. You cannot look around in any way. And the entire environment is pre-rendered. All of this has got to go. We're talking about a fully rendered in 3D world that you can explore with your typical normal analog camera that you can move around with the right stick like you can with pretty much any other third-person action-adventure game. And that's going to lead to a completely different experience here, where you're going to see even more angles of Castle Town. Castle Town will have to be redesigned a bit as well. Maybe they will also be scaling this up to some extent too. I think it's interesting that Castle Town was destroyed in Breath of the Wild, so we didn't actually get an opportunity to explore it then, and they didn't rebuild it in Tears of the Kingdom either. We did technically get to explore Castle Town a bit in Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, but that's not quite the same thing. This could be our opportunity to explore Castle Town in a modern game, so I'm very excited to see this. There is just so much that could be done. Like that first room you explore in Castle Town, when you get right past the drawbridge and you enter that building to the right and you see the knight with all the pots. When you take a look at the guard, The way he's clothed is just so basic. Like, it looks like he's just wearing boxers. Obviously, they're going to have to change around the way the guards look in a remake with better visuals so we can see exactly what's going on here. I assume the intent isn't to actually make it look like they're running around in their underwear. But sticking to this room, if you look around, it looks fine for the N64 era, but they're going to want to redecorate all these different rooms. The interior decorations need to become more sophisticated, more visually interesting. That's something that's usually pretty important when it comes to these ambitious visual remakes. So I expect a lot more going on in terms of interior decoration here. But building off a point I made in the prior video, I want to see characters make more sense. Not all these repeated lines. Like, if you speak to a lot of characters throughout Castletown, including the guard, they have just one line and that's all they're going to say. Nothing develops there. The guard suggests that you break through pots to kill some time. Well, what happens after you break all the pots? It would be interesting if he said something to reflect that. There's actually quite a few different NPCs in Castletown for Ocarina of Time. I think there's a lot of opportunity to expand on that, adding even more characters if that's the direction they want to choose. It's hard to say how ambitious they'll go with this, but I almost want them to expand Castletown to be something along the lines of what we saw of Clocktown in Majora's Mask, where not only are characters more responsive and have more meaningful dialogue as you speak to them, but things develop. They all have their own routes, their own paths, things they do throughout the course of the day. Perhaps there could be some extensive side quests here, where it really makes it feel like Castletown is this living, breathing ecosystem of people in Hyrule. Something that I think is really cool even about the original and the characters is that as you talk to them, they do provide hints as to what is going on with the world, how you progress. Like, one of them mentions water running all the way through Lake Hylia. Well, you know, maybe they should actually depict that in the actual game. Show us water trails or rivers that lead all the way to Lake Hylia. Make a believable world here. Or something else. When you go into these back alleys, there are doors that say it's strange, you can't get inside. Doors should be accessible in my opinion. If there's a door, there should be some way to get inside of it. The same way it works in Clocktown. Or how it works in Hateno Village in Breath of the Wild. There's really a lot they can build on here. But let's now talk about the Temple of Time. It's going to be so interesting to see how they depict this temple because it's such an important building in the entire series here. And this is the building in its heyday, when it's not in ruins like it is in Breath of the Wild. This is a temple that in theory could have people visiting it, which we don't actually really see in the game, minus one big story point very late on. If we are talking about a more advanced Castletown here with characters actually having roots and they're depicted as actually having lives, perhaps some of them will be visiting a church throughout the day. That would make some sense. Maybe there could even be some side quests tied into that. That would be so cool. But just talking about the temple itself, when you get inside, you look inside of it, you look up, all you see is a pitch blackness. That's gotta change. There needs to actually be a ceiling you can see that's not just nothingness. But also, again, this was made for the N64, so they were very limited at the time. There needs to be more visually here within the walls, the windows. Maybe we could see some stained glass windows. Maybe there could be more color rather than just mostly white. Maybe they could even make it feel a little bit more like having a church aesthetic. Perhaps there can be more designs on the walls. Maybe even these designs could be depicting different histories throughout Hyrule, at least in terms of the timeline up to that point in the series. Maybe hints towards the events of Skyward Sword, and so on. Like a depiction of Goddess Hylia, for example. That would make a lot of sense. But coming back to the central area of Castletown, your first go around here, you're going to meet Malon, the young girl from Lon Lon Ranch. Malon is arguably a very important character. In the prior installment of this series, I talked about how there needs to be voice acting this time around, but not voice acting across the board. They would be selective. During important cutscenes, you'll see certain characters talk, like Saria or Navi at times in big scenes, or the Deku Tree. Characters like that, it makes sense for them to talk. Malon is interesting because she's not as important to the story as these other characters, but is also way more important than all the other NPCs in Castletown. If we are talking about some grand expansions here, then there could be more quest lines and more story are centered around the characters from Lon Lon Ranch, including Malon. So maybe they even change around how you meet Malon here. Maybe there's some sort of important scene that occurs. Perhaps things can be handled pretty much in the same way, you'll just see Malon there, but upon speaking to her, it becomes an actual cutscene with some voice acting. I would love to see this depicted. There are a few different events tied to Malon and Talon during this portion of the game, some of which are a little dramatic, so I think it would be very cool if they took the time to make these some really interesting cutscenes here. Now, there's been a lot of theorizing that Monolith Soft is heavily involved with this remake. We're not sure, but what we do know is that Monolith Soft has been heavily involved with a lot of the last few big Zelda games, and Monolith Soft is known to deliver really strong stories with their Xenoblade games, some incredible cutscenes, good voice acting, very interesting stories here. And we've seen some recent interviews where the Zelda team is talking about wanting Monolith Soft to take on an even larger role with the Zelda series, and we even got even more recent interviews shortly after the release of the Mario movie, as we now progress perhaps the Zelda 40th anniversary celebrations this summer. That's usually when they start announcing them, actually, even though technically the anniversary is earlier in the year. These interviews shared a lot about how involved Monolith Soft was with Tears of the Kingdom, and it turns out they were responsible for a lot of really interesting, big creative decisions with the game. And so if Monolith Soft has heavy involvement with this Ocarina of Time remake, maybe they would also be handling the story scenes, the delivery of the cutscenes, and they could perhaps put some effort in here and really make them Xenoblade-esque, or even like some of the big cutscenes we've seen in Breath and Tears, which are pretty good, minus the muteness of Link, and deliver some really interesting scenes here. Like when you have to head back from Hyrule Castle because you don't know how to get quite inside because Talon is blocking your way and he's sleeping, when you hear Malon singing, that could be a really interesting scene. And also, just really nice to hear her voice. In this modern depiction, they might make it more of an in-depth song. But as you try to get into Hyrule Castle, there are some subtle things that I think need to be reworked. So, for example, there are these vines that if you don't go at the right angles, you won't actually latch onto, and it gets kind of annoying. I imagine something like this will be adjusted here, where it will be easier to grab on and climb through the vines. But I also think that climbing might be handled a little bit differently. I'm not talking about Breath of the Wild levels of climbing here, but maybe something more like what they have in Skyward Sword, where you do have a stamina meter, and I know some people don't like the idea of a stamina meter, but a stamina meter doesn't have to be annoying. This meter would just allow you to sprint more, be able to progress through the world quicker, or make leaps when you're climbing through vines and such, just speeding up the overall gameplay, and perhaps offering something else that can be expanded upon as a reward for doing more stuff that'll be put into this game, like with more side quests or different things you can find throughout Hyrule Field. At the very least, let's make climbing the vines in this one particular section not annoying. That would be nice. But just thinking about Hyrule Castle itself, a thought that I always had when I was younger playing through this game, every time, is, wow, it would be so cool if we could find a way to get inside Hyrule Castle. There's even a drawbridge, a very similar drawbridge to the one you have to pass through just to get into Castle Town, which has you wondering what's beyond this one. What can we see inside? We never actually get to explore this version of Hyrule Castle. I don't know if they would go this far, but it would be really nice if they let us explore Hyrule Castle here. I'm not asking for them to make a giant, massive castle. Maybe it's kind of a smallish castle, but still something that allows us to see what's going on. And let me also just say, they never actually show the king in Ocarina of Time, but he is mentioned several times throughout the story. Like, for example, in Castle Town, there's this couple, and one of them mentions how handsome the King of Hyrule is. If they're talking about how handsome he is, well, why can't you see him? I think it's just really interesting that they never actually showed him in Ocarina of Time. Even Princess Zelda talks about this interaction she had with her father, where he did not want to heed her dreams as actual true prophecy. And then there's also Ganondorf swearing fealty to the king. We see Ganondorf, we never see the king. So if we're talking about restructuring the world, scaling things up so it feels more believable with these modern visuals, and having more ambitious, epic, interesting cutscenes with voice acting here, then maybe they want to rethink how some of these things are handled. Even if we can't actually explore the extent of the inside of Hyrule Castle, maybe actually show a cutscene where we can see the inside of Hyrule Castle and see the depiction of the king. That would be interesting. Or maybe they do expand upon the story a little bit here, and there is a little bit more thrown in during the child section of the game, where there's a quest where you actually have to get deeper into Hyrule Castle. You get into the inside, and this includes an interaction with the king. That could be really cool. That would be a lot of extra stuff, but I think a lot of people would be really into it. I know I would. It's something I've wanted ever since I was a kid. Even if they don't go that far, just thinking about the structure of this garden that you get through to interact with Princess Zelda, where you have this window that allows you to stare into this room that seems to be a piece to the throne room, seems kind of weird and awkward. I think that should be restructured a bit so it makes more sense. Things like this we overlooked or glossed over because of the N64 era, but if they were to remake the game with modern standards in mind, that would have to change a little bit or it would be kind of weird. But also, they better not get rid of those paintings that you can see if you stare off in the window at different angles. There's a Mario, Luigi, Yoshi, Bowser, and Peach painting. It would be cool if they added even more that you could find, depending on where you're looking at, or if there is some exploration deeper into the castle. But after your conversations with Princess Zelda, you talk to Impa, and there's some really cool stuff going on here. Impa teaches you how to play a song, and this is the first song you learn in the game, Zelda's Lullaby. And I'm not really asking for any changes here. Obviously, things are going to sound different with modern audio effects, so it's going to be great to hear. But the idea of being able to play instruments again in a meaningful way in a Zelda game is just exciting to think about. Ocarina of Time arguably did it the best, but Majora's Mask still had a lot of it. Wind Waker still had a decent amount and it was fun. In Twilight Princess, I kind of feel like they botched it with the wolf stuff, and in Skyward Sword, you lost a lot of control and it just really wasn't all that special. It was pretty minimal. And then in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, they did away with it entirely. With this remake, we're going to see it come back, and that's exciting. Playing an instrument and having the instrument make meaningful differences in the world is going to be really fun. So I'm just excited to have it come back. This is not something I'm expecting them to change, but I think it's actually still worth pointing out because perhaps you might think they would do away with it because of modern games, but when you think about what Ocarina of Time is, Ocarina is literally in the title of the game, the instrument is extremely instrumental to the gameplay experience. Pun intended there, so I'm just excited to see it come back, and I'm very confident it will. Something else that's neat about Impa, though, is how you see her escape in a very ninja-like way, and it certainly gets me wondering about what we might see from Sheik later on to the game, but I'll probably talk about that in a different installment in this series, assuming you guys continue to enjoy this series. So let me know if you do want to see future installments in discussing different changes we could see throughout an Ocarina of Time remake. But I'm not quite done yet. Let's also talk about Lon Lon Ranch. Lon Lon Ranch, I think, should maybe be expanded upon a bit as well. Maybe they can make Lon Lon Ranch a little bit more expansive, and this helps to fill up Hyrule Field. Maybe there are more people working on the farm. Maybe there are more interactions and quests involved with this. But also, when you're in the ranch, I think they should put more than one bed. There's 3 people on the ranch, there's only 1 bed. That doesn't quite make sense. I kind of assumed that Ingo slept like in some hay or something like that, and maybe that's the case. Maybe there could be more suggestion to that. That would be kind of funny. But still, I think it's important to show how this is a believable world. So designing things where there are different rooms and beds and such and places for people to eat, it needs to make sense. So hopefully we see that depicted in the remake. And as I mentioned earlier, I do feel like there could be maybe even more importance placed on the Lon Lon Ranch characters. Maybe flesh them out a bit more, especially if things are going to be a bit more fleshed out. Maybe they could even add like a storyline where it's not just Lon Lon Ranch, there are other ranches or other organizations throughout Hyrule Field, and there's a bit of a competition there. This could be how they fill up the area and give you more things to do throughout Hyrule Field. This could lead to horse races, competitions in terms of sales, in terms of getting resources out to the different areas of Hyrule. They could really help to make this feel more like a living, breathing world here by integrating something like this. Also, last thing, I am so stoked to see a modern depiction of Baby Epona. I don't know if they'll change anything about it. Maybe they'll allow you to pet Baby Epona once you play the song that gets her to warm up to you. So a little bit of extra interaction there as opposed to just letting the horse ram into you so you're just kind of moving to the side would be kind of nice to see. But what do you all think? What sort of changes do you envision with Lon Lon Ranch, the greater Hyrule Field, Castle Town, and Hyrule Castle? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.